In this video, we're going to tie a jigged micro booger, basically a woolly booger tied on a small jig hook. And this fly is extremely effective for trout, smallmouth, small largemouth bass, crappie, bluegill, anything that would eat a small woolly booger will eat this fly. It's an extremely effective fly. So let's get started. The hook I'm using is an Umpqua 555 jig hook. This is a size 14 and I'm using a 1/8 inch tungsten bead on it. And it's a barbed hook, so I've already pinched the barb down on this hook. And the nice thing about this hook is the shank is 2x long, and so it's really nice for tying these bugger type patterns. So I'm going to start my thread just behind the bead, and I'm going to wrap all the way back to the bend of the hook. And that on this hook, that is just above the barb. And then I'm going to wrap back and leave my thread hanging just behind the bead. Let me straighten that hook out a little bit. Now for the tail on this fly, I am using woolly bugger marabou, and I like woolly bugger marabou a bit better than standard marabou because the fibers, as you can see, are quite thick and much shorter than standard marabou, and this is hairline Sculpin olive. And we want the tail about the same length as the overall hook itself, so something like about like that, I suppose, and we'll transfer that measurement to the back. And then I begin tying down right behind the bead. Now it's going to be a mess as you tie this material down. That's just the way marabou is. And so I wrap all the way back. Stay out of the way there. Wrap all the way back to the barb. And then to trim off this excess, I like to twist it and cord it up a bit. And then I can go in with my scissors and then just trim that excess off. And we've got a lot of fuzzies left here, but that won't hurt anything. We're going to wrap down some of those and take our thread all the way back to behind the bead. Now for the base of the body on this, we're not going to use dubbing like a traditional woolly bugger. We're going to use Hairline's Midge Diamond Braid, and this is a small diamond braid, and this is Peacock color. And I'll take a couple of loose wraps here, and then I'll just pull that back to just behind the bead. And then wrap all the way back to the base of my tail. And take my thread back forward to, again, behind the bead. And I wrap this diamond braid forward, just make touching wraps to cover the body. And you can see it's going to, oops, I skipped a spot. Let me back up just a little bit. Yep. And it's pretty much going to take all of those fuzzies and cover them up. And that's fine. A couple of gaps there. But I take 2 wraps behind the Midge Diamond Braid and then a couple of wraps in front. And then I trim off the excess diamond braid and leave my thread hanging behind the bead. For hackle on this, there's any number of options. Hen hackle, it usually is best for woolly buggers, and I like the whiting hen capes. They go down very small, so if you tie small 16, 18 soft hackles, they're really good. And here I have a Grizzly. I really like the Grizzly, the light colored Grizzly on this olive. I like that contrast, though you could certainly use olive hackle as well. And I'm going to strip all this webby part at the bottom. I'm going to strip all of that off. And I'm left with the main part of the feather. Now you notice the feather is concave on one side and convex on the other. We want that concave part toward the hook shank because as we wrap back, we want our hackle to lay back a bit and not forward like a dry fly. But I'm going to take one more step. With the concave side facing away from me, I'm going to grab the hackle on the right side and strip about a 1/2 inch of hackle off. Now to tie this in, I'm going to hold the hackle at an angle, hold the quill at an angle, and take a couple of loose and then tighten wraps. And you notice that I don't tie it with the hackle or the feather fibers all the way down against the hook shank. I leave a little gap there because that's going to help start my wrap. And those feathers we stripped off earlier, as we wrap over the hook shank, that will help let the feather lay down a little bit better. So I want to take that, next I want to take this quill and pull it back and tie down in front to really, really secure it in there. And then I'll trim off that excess. Now at this point, I'm going to just pull my feather out of the way a bit and make open spiral wraps all the way back to the base of my tail and leave my thread hanging there. Now, I am going to use hackle pliers to wrap this. You can certainly use your fingers, but I just find it easier with hackle pliers. And so I get the tip of the feather secured in those pliers. And then as I take my initial wrap, notice how where I strip those fibers off, it lays down nice and flat. So I'm going to take 2 wraps very close together at the front. And then I'm going to hold my feather at an angle toward the rear and start palmering or spiraling that feather back all the way to the base of my tail until I run out of feather. And then I take my thread, take a few wraps, cinch that down tightly, come on, and get in there and try to trim that out without getting too many feathers. You want to try to avoid trapping feather fibers with the thread, but it's almost impossible to do that. Now I could whip finish here at the back of the tail and the fly would be finished. So if you're a hand whip finisher, you can finish the fly here. But to add a little durability and to make it easier to whip finish, I'm going to move my thread back to the front and I'm going to weave it back and forth. Just move that thread back and forth as you spiral your thread forward. If you trap a few fibers, that's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. And I'm going to work my thread forward all the way to behind the bead. There we go. And then I'm going to take my whip finish tool and we will give it a 5, 6, 7 turn whip finish. Good whip finish. And then come in with my scissors and trim out my tag end of my thread. Now, if you have trapped any fibers, you can take a bodkin or the tip of your scissors and just come in and pick those out. But looks like we did a pretty good job here. So that is the jigged woolly bugger. I hope you'll give it a try. This is an extremely effective panfish, smallmouth bass, crappie pattern, tied in multiple colors, chartreuse, black, olive, white. It's just a really versatile fly, just like, of course, the original woolly bugger is.